Stephanie Bethany is a relatively large autistic YouTuber with over 11,000 subscribers on her main channel. I first became aware of her work when doing research for my video on Autism Acceptance Month, specifically when investigating the harmful actions carried out by groups such as Autism Speaks. And it seemed that Stephanie was a compassionate, well-reasoned and empathetic speaker. That's when I noticed she had various other channels, including a religious one which centered on her Christianity. So I naturally got excited. Compassionate Christian channels that focus on their religious beliefs are, to put rather bluntly, a rare find. I thought that Stephanie might have some new and intriguing insight into theology, which, regardless of my atheism, is something that interests me. I didn't pass my Beliefs in Society module with 98% by parroting that jerk, Dawkins. I did so because the topic draws me in, and I thought that maybe Stephanie could build on that interest. Which is when I came across this.
Homosexual acts are wrong because the Bible has said so, and also it doesn't lead to anything other than a feeling. You don't end up with a child eventually. You just have a feeling in your body. Now, I do believe it is possible for God to make a way and for you to be in a heterosexual relationship. And if it's the case that maybe you want to start a family or something like that, I believe that God can do that for you. Does that mean that someone who has done that before cannot be clean and not come before God and repent and ask that He helps them to remain celibate? No, they can do that. They can always do that. Even someone who has been delivered from alcoholism. Some days they're gonna sit there and they're gonna think, you know, I really want a beer right now. Does that make them sinful? No. It just makes them a human being. Look, we shouldn't put people down. We shouldn't say, oh, it's okay to have these relations with people because it's love. I don't think we always understand the difference between love and lust. So what I just want to say is that I think that churches should open up the doors to people who are either in homosexual relationships or think they're homosexual because of attractions, and let them know, hey, homosexual acts aren't right, and you shouldn't be doing that with someone of the same sex.
Now this is just the tip of the iceberg, and already there's a lot of clear homophobia and biphobia to tackle. To clarify, that is statements that actively work to uphold systemic violence targeted at queer folk such as myself. Sure, it's all packaged really nicely and presented as this genuinely well-meaning position. But this, what may be termed soft homophobia, is in fact one of the more dangerous forms of bigotry out there. Ironically, for the very same reason the work of groups like Autism Speaks is so dangerous. It sneaks in and normalizes the systemic violence and the intolerance it's premised on by presenting itself as care and compassion when it's nothing of the sort. It's much easier to fool a well-meaning observer into accepting the toxicity fed to them in short, sweet doses like this than, say, the angry yellings of the Westboro Baptist Church. It's also much easier for cishet people to call out the clear bigotry on display by groups like the Westboro Baptist Church, since if they're open to greater scrutiny when it comes to soft bigotry, then they might have to do some reflecting on their own actions. So don't be fooled. The content of the message Stephanie puts out there is the same as that put out by the Westboro Baptist Church. The only marked difference is it'll go further than the outright hostility, and in that rests the real danger. Now I'm going to try and keep my composure throughout this video, however I hope you can understand that hearing these things is not easy, especially with my knowledge of soft homophobia and the damage it can cause. So if I flare up at various points, it's not because I'm responding to religious content, it's because what's being said is horrific. So with that noted, let's get down to business, starting by cleaning up some misconceptions Stephanie has about being LGBT+ and our choice of identity-first language.
Really, this is just a thing that people get so confused about because we make it our identity. especially with the LGBTQ plus community, they really pushed it as your identity. They want to define you with a label down to every little thing that you could possibly have. What is your gender? What is your sexual attraction? What is this? What is that? And you can have this really, really long description of who you are, but who you are is not based on how you feel about whether you're a girl or a boy or whether you like girls or boys. That is not your identity, and I find it really sad that people feel that way. So between the LGBTQ plus community pushing that if you feel a certain way, that is your identity, and Christians not understanding the difference between a homosexual act and feeling a certain way, we have this clash that comes where it almost seems like Christians are saying if you're gay, if you're lesbian, whatever, you're a bad person and God doesn't love you, that you're just a sinner, that you're just an abomination, and that is not true. So look, if you're a person who is homosexual, and that is also another thing I don't like doing, because if you're saying, oh, you're a homosexual, that's saying that is your identity. So if you're someone who feels attraction for someone of the same sex, that doesn't, in my opinion, mean you have to call yourself a homosexual, a gay person, a lesbian person, a bi person if you feel like you like both, whatever. I don't think it's very good to put that kind of label on yourself because you are now identifying yourself as that. And I think it's important to understand that feelings do not mean you have to act on them in any sort of situation. Feelings do not always have to mean you act on them.
I find it amazing how an autistic self-advocate can pull the whole, you're not gay, you're just a person with homosexual feelings card. Because that is all Stephanie is doing here. She's trying to isolate two of the most foundational aspects of a person's identity and declare them as something separate to who they are. Because while Stephanie declares sexuality and gender do not define you as a person, they very much define the lives of cis heterosexual people. Many of their texts center on either their romantic longing for one another or discovering the path to becoming a man or becoming a woman. Then we have words such as husband and wife, showing how our language is structured in so many ways to emphasize this importance. The only difference between cis-het people and queer folk is that society assumes cis-heterosexuality as the norm in the same way that being allistic is assumed to be the norm when it comes to brain function. Queer people using labels is an active challenge to that state of normality. The more we use these labels, the more understood we become, and the less abnormal we appear. Therefore, we must be stopped. This whole, don't let these labels define you thrown out there by people like Stephanie is not for our benefit. It's to ensure cis and heteronormativity remain unchallenged by the very simple act of acknowledging our very existence as people. Because when you're non-normative, existence is political. Ever wondered why representation matters? This is part of the reason identity-first labels are so important to us as a community. It asserts our existence counter to what society expects and demands. I remember my first day at college, high school for those of you out in the States. Now, I'd been outed as bisexual at school, something that resulted in heavy bullying to the point of regular assault. So I made the decision to take a stand when I went to college. When it came to going around the circle, sharing one fact about yourself, I knew what I wanted to say. I stood up and declared that I was bisexual, and that is one of the proudest moments of my life. And even though it was 9 years ago, I can still remember it vividly. As class wrapped up, I was approached by two of my fellow students. One was a gay man who had moved locally with his boyfriend to escape their parents. The other was a gay man and foreign student from Nepal who had never come out to a single person. Yet he came out to me then and there, and we've remained friends ever since. We all got involved in the LGBT+ society and thrived as a result of it. Labels matter to us, because that is the thing. Stephanie's opinion here is worthless. Stephanie doesn't have to like it. After all, it's not about her. that's kind of the point. The labels we have created are a part of queer culture. It's a way of reaching across the generations to recognize that we're not alone. We never have been. Which leads me on to the second way Stephanie's attempts to control the conversation and the very language we use impacts things. It prevents us from establishing heritage and community. Our sense of belonging is not hereditary, passed down from parent to child, like ethnicity, religion, etc. Our heritage is a long chain of filmmakers, poets, musicians, inventors, politicians, you name it, all linked together by certain labels. The reason I personally use bisexual whilst others push me to use pansexual is because I feel it has a stronger connection to said heritage. When I stood up that day and acknowledged that I was bisexual, I wasn't alone. I had Freddie Mercury, Virginia Woolf, and Malcolm X standing there with their hands on my shoulder. Metaphorically speaking, of course. And there is strength in that, just as there is strength in the living community. To attack the language is to attack that connection, is to isolate me from both my heritage and my community, which makes me more vulnerable and therefore easier to prey upon. Another important part of Identity First language is that it acknowledges the fact, and it is a fact in spite of Stephanie's protests, that being LGBT+ is an intrinsic, immutable, and important part of who we are. That there's nothing to cure or to save us from. It's just normal human diversity that enriches the lives of everyone if accepted. As a trans person, a term I often hear and cringe at when I do is transgenderism. It's such a horrific word. I'm not someone with transgenderism. I'm a transgender and bisexual person. That's just who I am. Those are labels I freely adopt because they are important to me as a queer person. Now, a lot of what Stephanie does here borders on, or is rather simply, gaslighting. Anytime she talks about same-gender attraction or titles, she talks about how we feel like we're attracted to people of the same gender, or that we think we're homosexual. The same goes for how she referred to trans people as feeling that they're of a certain gender. Stephanie is outright refusing to accept our experiences as explained to her, pretending that this is confusion, that we're just not thinking right. She has no course of action to tackle the lived reality of LGBT+ experiences, so instead she seeks to invalidate them entirely by using language intended to question our sanity. Now, as mentioned, Stephanie disagrees with the fact that a person's sexuality is an immutable part of who they are. At various points throughout her video, she states that she believes it possible for a person to be saved from same-gender attraction. Now, she does this in two ways. We'll come to the second in a minute, but let's tackle the way that she talks about how lesbians and gay people should turn to abstinence, like in these sections.
So it is just as honoring to God for someone who feels attraction towards the same sex to remain celibate and to honor God through that. Not everybody has to be in a relationship, and a lot of people might say, well, Stephanie, that's really awful for you to suggest that they can't love. Well, there's a lot of different forms and types of love. You get love from your family, from your mom, from your dad, from your sisters, from your brothers. You get love from your cousins and your uncles and your aunts and your grandparents and that kind of familial love. And then you have friendship love, where you would be willing to even put your life down for someone else, for another friend. There is different types of love, so someone who is remaining celibate might not experience the particular kind of love that Hollywood and everyone else seems to glorify, and even Christians, because they're so obsessed with their future husband or whatever. You don't have to be in a relationship. You don't have to get married. You don't have to do those sorts of things, and that's okay. God didn't call everyone to do that. Does that mean someone who has done that before cannot be clean and not come before God and repent and ask that he helps them to remain celibate. No, they can do that. They can always do that.
It is awful of you to say. It's also awful of you to label being in a same-gender relationship as unclean. Now, her choice of language is not the only way Bethany frames things in a manner that feeds into the systemic violence targeted towards queer people. She also does so in her choice of comparisons.
Even someone who has been delivered from alcoholism, some days they're going to sit there and they're going to think, you know, I really want a beer right now. Does that make them sinful? No. It just makes them a human being.
This idea that being in a consensual relationship with another adult can be equated to the destructive nature of alcoholism is frankly disgusting. Again, I come back around to Autism Speaks and how they present autism. When you make statements like these, there's no difference between what you're doing here and things like their I am autism commercial, which compared being autistic to having HIV or diabetes. But bringing things back round to the assertion that gay people should just be celibate, that is awful, as you mention, because one form of love is not a substitute for another. When someone loses a parent, you wouldn't go, oh well, at least you still have your spouse. So why then do you feel it acceptable to effectively do the opposite? Fact is, it's worse. Why? Well, because unlike the loss of a loved one, what you're forwarding isn't an inevitable fact about reality. Same-gender love can and does thrive if given the same nurturing and supportive environment as opposite gender love. Now, some of you might be wondering why I keep comparing what she's saying here to what Autism Speaks says. I'm trying to meet her on queer issues where she's already at on autism, to remember how she felt when she heard these things said about autistic people, to help her understand how we feel when she says the same things about queer people. Back to the matter though, for many people, romantic and sexual attraction and acting on said attraction is a significant part of life. There is a reason we fought so long and hard to undo the damage done to the institution of marriage by early Christendom to allow for same-gender marriage once more, because it's an important social institution that recognizes what is a key part of life for many people. That's why interracial marriage was also important. It'd be very easy for some racists to retrofit your argument here and apply it to marriage between people of different ethnicities. Yet, hopefully, you'd see that for the bullshit argument it is. Or hell, look at the difficulties some autistic people face in getting married, being outright refused or forced to pick between being married and receiving their disability security. Would you respond in the same way to them? Hey, not everyone is meant to be in a relationship. Now, not all love results in marriage, yet you're arguing that a gay or bisexual person should just suppress their love for others of the same gender, which, yes, for many includes physical attraction and intimate relations. Pushing people with a sexual need to celibacy can have severe mental health consequences. It's no coincidence that the clergy of specific churches and sects which enforce or even just encourage celibacy are rampant with sexual abuse. Hell, people struggle to go a couple of years this way. Abstinence only in teens is a complete failure. It doesn't work. In fact, it lowers the average age at which teens engage in sexual intercourse and other risk-taking behaviors. We are a sexual species. This is a biological fact which can be observed not just in our behavior, but in our physiology. Everything from the average size of the phallus in comparison to the potency, or lack thereof, of our gametes, down to the very existence of the clitoris, which exists solely for pleasure. People have sexual needs, and when those needs are not met, it can manifest itself in major problems. There are, of course, certain people who fall under the asexual umbrella who do not have these needs. But there are also those among them that aren't sexually attracted to people, but do have sexual needs and will still engage in sexual acts as a form of mechanical relief. And just because they exist doesn't mean everyone else can be forced to be like them. I'd hope that you, as an autistic person, would understand the horror of being forced to act like something you're not. However, if you believe this body is a perfect design by God himself, that includes the sexual physiology already discussed. Not to forget the pleasure response that's stimulating the prostate via anal sex in cis men, trans women, and some NB folk. Something God could have worked around. All of this is part of God's apparent plan, his design, if you genuinely believe that. Now, this whole thing intersects with one of your attempts to avoid outright decrying LGBT people as dirty sinners, and that's the issue of committing adultery in our hearts.
So also for those of you who say, well, if you lust after someone in your heart, you've already done the act. Is attraction necessarily lust? And I think this is something that a lot of Christians, especially very religious Christians, get this confused. Is attraction lust? And I would say no, attraction is not lust. And so for someone to like somebody else, you're crossing the line when you're sitting there entertaining the thought of what it'd be like to undress them and to do all these things with them without their consent because it's in your brain. Those sorts of things, that's lust. But to just feel an attraction towards somebody, that is not lust. And I'd like to say that for even heterosexual relationships. That was something I didn't really touch upon in my Girl Defined video, but I have kind of seen this theme where they almost seem to equate attraction with lust, and that is not the case. It is normal to feel things towards people, and that is okay. However, it matters what you do.
Now, I find this whole lust versus attraction distinction to be splitting theoretical hairs. Unless you're ace in some way, sexual attraction is going to be an element of your general attraction towards people. However, I don't need to address that. Why? Well, a response I'm kind of expecting to my earlier section is the statement that, well, gay people can still masturbate. But when I consider that with what Bethany says right here about picturing yourself doing sexual things with others, we hit a bit of a problem. Namely in the fact that said outlet, the one possible counter-argument to what I said in my previous section about sexual needs, would be included here under Bethany's own definition of lust. So not only are you not allowed to date and be intimate with others of the same gender, you're not even allowed to masturbate whilst thinking of them. Which, if you're a celibate gay person, is all you're really going to be able to do to meet that sexual need. And even if you manage to mechanically get yourself off, there's always a chance that you'll have an intrusive thought. Not to go into too much detail, but I have been doing my thing before, happily going along when suddenly someone I have strong emotional feelings for has popped into my head. And that is completely normal. It's a fact of our human psychology. So what Bethany is arguing here is setting people up for failure and the resulting fear and guilt. It's completely unhealthy and unethical from a psychological perspective. However, as bad as the whole just be celibate thing is, Bethany takes things further to argue that God is able to actually open gay people up to heterosexual relationships.
Now, I do believe it is possible for God to make a way and for you to be in a heterosexual relationship. It is possible for God to deliver you from that stuff, but I would like to note that still having those feelings doesn't make you sinful. It doesn't make you not honoring God. And I'm really thankful to Jackie Hill Perry for opening my eyes on this situation, because it is something that I had not really fully understood And she really put it into words that made sense. And she said that Christians don't really understand that being set free and being delivered and following after God does not necessarily mean being straight. Now, again, this is not about what you do, it is about your attraction. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna like girls if you're a guy who is attracted to guys. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to feel that way ever again. It doesn't mean that. It means that you are deciding that you are not going to do intimate things with someone of the same sex. And if it's the case that maybe you want to start a family or something like that, I believe that God can do that for you. Jackie Hill Perry, she's in a relationship where she's married to a man and she has a child. And I'm sure in previously beforehand, that would have seemed impossible. That would have seemed like she should never have that because she was considered gay because she had attractions.
Fun fact: bisexual people exist. Less fun fact: a person's sexuality or gender cannot be changed, and attempts to do so are destructive. This is the scientific consensus held by everyone who has ever studied any of the relevant fields. All that can actually be achieved is people can be forced back into the closet, something that carries with it serious psychological harm. 42% of all LGBT+ youth who have been subjected to the dishonestly named reparative therapy admit to having attempted suicide. That is compared to a baseline of 8% in a society that's still not accepting of LGBT+ identities. Even attempting to convince an LGBT+ person to give up who they are, as this video is doing, increases that 8% baseline to 23%. Then we have another study by San Francisco State University titled Supportive Families, Healthy Children, helping families with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender children. The study compared the impact of growing up in a supportive versus rejective household on young LGBT+ adults aged 21 to 25. They found that queer individuals from households who rejected them on the basis of being LGBT+ were, quote, more than 8 times as likely to have attempted suicide, nearly 6 times as likely to report high levels of depression, more than 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, and more than 3 times as likely to be at high risk of HIV and sexually transmitted diseases, end quote. Now you might argue that Stephanie is not talking about children, but the fact is, the majority of well-adjusted LGBT+ adults are not lining up to partake in reparative therapy. What science shows us is actually reparative torture. It is adolescents who suffer the most as the result of what Stephanie is propagating here. These are the demonstrable facts that I and anyone else can readily show you. Stephanie has only a single piece of anecdotal evidence. She claims a gay woman has managed to maintain a marriage with a man. Now, I could discuss the myriad of problems with anecdotal arguments, but fact is, I don't even need to go there. Even if I assume that everything in Stephanie's anecdote is true, she's still only talking about one person, and one person isn't representative of the entire gay population. In short, she has nothing to ground her position on. That's why groups such as the UK Council for Psychotherapy, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the US Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, to name a few, all agree that what she is saying here not only lacks any and all merit, but is actively harmful towards LGBT+ people. And I hope Stephanie would understand this fact, how it's entirely possible and harmful to force a group of people to outwardly hide who they are for the sensitivities of society. When it comes to the autistic community, attempts to stop them from stimming, to force eye contact, or force them to learn in a standardized manner, are all attempts to suppress their autism. Something that is very similar to what she's calling for here. Wrapping this message up with the pretenses of care and love does not change that fact. If you actually cared, you'd do your research and change your views in accordance with the evidence, not deny the evidence so that your personal bigotry might be preserved. And I know you bring up the Bible as the basis for your belief in sections like this.
Homosexual acts are wrong because the Bible has said so, and also it doesn't lead to anything other than a feeling. You don't end up with a child eventually. You just have a feeling in your body. And our bodies weren't designed for male on male and female on female. So naturally, those acts don't make sense and they're not right.
But you can read whatever you want into that book. A fact shown to us by Robert Carboneus's 2015 paper titled 7 Gay Texts, Biblical Passages Used to Condemn Homosexuality, which goes over each of the passages and points out how they likely weren't taking issue with consensual intercourse between two people of the same gender. Instead, the article posits that they were taking issue with the surrounding rape, pedestry, cultism, and prostitution. Your interpretation of these biblical passages is just that, an interpretation that reflects you and the feelings you hold on the matter. The Bible is not your basis, it's your excuse. This video reflects your character and the culture, not the theology, but the culture that surrounds Christianity. As for this idea that it doesn't leave you with anything more than a feeling, putting aside that this is demonstrably wrong for a second, why does it need to be more than a feeling? Why is love for love's sake wrong? Why does it have to result in children? You talk about Christians obsessed with marriage, yet here you are going on about childbirth, which is not the only reason to love someone. Myself and Adita have no intention of having a child. But we have more than just a feeling. We have support, companionship, security, so many things that go beyond how we feel. Also, there are same-gender couples who can have children, and not just with surrogacy or adoption, which are both really important. I certainly like to see tell an adopted child that their parents' love, same or opposite gender, is worthless. But the fact remains, gay and bisexual trans people exist, meaning that same-gender couples, in which they're fully capable of having children which are a blend of both parents' genetics, exist. And you know what also exists? Infertile heterosexual people. According to the US Department of Health and Human Services, as much as 10% of women in the US aged 15 to 44 have difficulty getting pregnant. Does that mean their relationships are meaningless, since without external support, their relationship would amount to nothing more than a feeling? How do you think those who are just flat out infertile, who have no chance of achieving pregnancy without medical assistance, should be treated legally and socially? Should they avoid romantic relationships? Or will you permit them to be in relationships with other equally infertile people? If you can't quite tell from my tone, this argument paints you a bit of a tosser speaking a load of old wank. Ability to bear children has never been the deciding factor of relationships, showing your sudden concern over it to be nothing more but concern trolling. You've attempted to grasp at the nearest thing that you believe, incorrectly I must note, separates same and opposite gender relationships. And it shows. This has the hallmarks of ad hoc desperation, not planned thoroughness, rather similar to this stream of thought from near the start of your video.
So a lot of this problem is coming from the idea that we should embrace and just go for every single feeling and emotion that we have. We should just act on it because it's what makes us feel good. The problem here is that you're thinking that if I am attracted to someone of the same sex, I must now get in a relationship with someone of the same sex and take that further. However, that is not necessarily the case, and that's also why you were seeing some weirder stuff, and I am not equating someone feeling same-sex attraction to this, but I am saying that the idea of prompting people to do whatever makes them feel good and just do what they feel leads you to people who do intimate things with animals and inanimate objects and things like that. Things that are very clearly not natural and not normal and just really jacked up because you told them if you feel it, you should do it. And that's just really not the case. If I feel like hitting someone upside the head, I probably really shouldn't do it. Now, is it a sin that I felt that way? No. But if I sat there and entertained the thought of how nice it'd be to just whack them right upside the head and see the pain on their face and hope that they get knocked out, then I'm really going on the sinful side because I'm entertaining that idea and doing it in my heart. However, having an attraction for someone is not sinful. So from the standpoint of homosexuality being having an attraction for someone of the same sex, they can technically be following after God and be a Christian because even despite the feelings, they honor God above their feelings, they honor God above their emotions.
Just so we're clear, saying, I'm not comparing homosexuality to X, right before you go on to do just that is a waste of time. If you're not comparing it to something, then why bring it up? At best, this would be an admission to not caring about your viewers' time. But the fact that you go on to claim that the reason homosexuality is accepted is the same reason that bestiality exists shows us that you're comparing the two, that you are drawing a comparison. Now, I know you say inanimate objects as well, but your hang-ups when it comes to sex toys are entirely your own, even if it does make your proposed celibacy sound even shittier than before. However, in making this assertion, you reveal that you lack an important understanding when it comes to sex, and that is the concept of informed consent. Homosexuality is not justified on grounds that it makes us feel good. It's justified on the same grounds as heterosexuality, that it's two people engaging in consensual romantic and/or sexual activity, and is therefore none of your business. I don't know if you knew this, but an animal cannot give informed consent. Neither can a child. And here's the scary thing. This failure to comprehend informed consent is a condition that's rampant throughout the entire anti-LGBT+ segments of Christianity, which is one of the major problems with the religion, teaching that specific acts are wrong because God says so, rather than they're wrong on account of various reasons, leads many Christians to be ill-equipped to discuss ethics in any meaningful way. They have no grounding or understanding of the field beyond God dictates. Right, now ignoring the fact that you haven't shown your God to exist, why should I or anyone else care about the subjective opinions of your God? The fact is, this argument's vile nature does not lessen on account of its delivery or the attempts to add a disclaimer. It's equally as sick here as it is when made elsewhere. And this needs to be said. And let's be clear, as noted earlier, this is her interpretation of scripture. This video is not me targeting Stephanie because she is a Christian, but because she's using her Christianity to try and shield herself from criticism over her clear homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, which makes sentiments like these entirely laughable.
Look, we shouldn't put people down. We shouldn't say, oh, it's okay to have these relations with people because it's love. I don't think we always understand the difference between love and lust.
The fact that she can't even acknowledge same-gender love without air quoting the word love is putting us down. It's indicating that our relationships, our connections, our love is lesser or fake. You cannot hold that view and be anything other than a homophobic and biphobic bigot. You just can't. Now, I don't know if I'll reach Stephanie in this video, but it's important to make on one very key account. When I informed the person who sent me Stephanie's channel that I wouldn't include her due to the clear-cut homophobia, they were shocked. Not only were they a long-time fan of her work on autism, they were queer themselves. They had no idea as to her intolerance towards LGBT+ folk, and that's scary. It's scary that people might support her work, some even financially, and back someone actively propagating harmful rhetoric that's used to demonize all queer people and strip them of their rights. Putting bigotry on a different channel does not make it off limits. It's not a sign that you care, it's a sign that you know what you are doing is wrong, and yet you choose to do it anyway, and that is damning in itself. Now, if you appreciate what myself and Aditya do here on the channel in fighting back against misinformation, do know that you can support us on Patreon. Your support gives us the funds to keep going and to keep putting out videos involving this level of research. You can also check out our other videos to see more of what we have to offer. So with that said, we'd just like to thank our Patreon sponsors, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, Soraya and Katie, Garrett Van Vorst, Chelsea Williams, Doyle Jackson, Wellington Marcus, Sosh Daniels, Justin Allen, and Atlas5. And for myself and Aditya, take care now.